Commander Valax sighed, his scaled hands massaging the dull throbbing in his temples. Another day, another formal complaint was made by a member of the Alliance. This time, it was the Carthians blustering about an undeclared act of aggression against their border colony. The audacity. "They burned crops, sir," his subordinate squeaked, its voice trembling amidst the oppressive silence of Valax's office. "Wiped out civilian outposts, destroyed key infrastructure without even a formal declaration of hostilities." The commander's eyes narrowed. Of course, they didn't. Humans never did. The Carthians were not the first to complain about human tactics. In the few short decades since their emergence on the galactic stage, humans had single-handedly redefined the meaning of war. Where other species saw elaborate rules of engagement, treaties, measured deployments, and calculated maneuvers, humans saw only obstacles, nuisances to be swept away in their brutal pursuit of victory. Valax could still clearly remember the first time he'd locked eyes with a human admiral shortly after their initial contact with the Alliance. It was a formal gathering. Flags of member nations were proudly displayed and protocols were rigidly observed. When the human delegation arrived late, clad in simple worn uniforms while others wore ceremonial dress, it was seen as a minor breach of intergalactic etiquette. The human admiral's introductory speech, however, was anything but diplomatic. "You call this war?" The grizzled, battle-hardened man had scoffed, his voice booming through the grand hall. "These are children's games. I've seen tougher scraps on my homeworld's playgrounds." The hall had erupted in a furious uproar. Through the din, Valax had registered a simple fact. The human stared unflinchingly at the outrage, his eyes burning with the cold light of a predator. There was no bluster, no insult intended. The man was simply stating the truth as he saw it. And so it began. Humans, their arrival a jarring wake-up call to the complacent Alliance. They moved dizzily, their strategies unpredictable, their resolve terrifying. There were whispers, appalled, indignant whispers of guerrilla tactics, civilian involvement, and strikes against what were traditionally considered non-military targets. The Galactic Alliance, built on centuries of well-regulated, almost ritualistic conflict, was thrown into a spiral of chaos and confusion. The Carthians, with their rigid honor code, the insectoid Zaxith, their focus on overwhelming numbers, even the trade-minded Ferengi, and their elaborate negotiation tactics, had no answer for the human onslaught. "Their unpredictability is their greatest weapon," Valax mused to his subordinate, pacing the polished floor. "We can't outsmart them. No one has yet figured out their logic." Reports trickled in of Carthian fleets being lured into meticulously planned ambushes, their formations picked apart by hit-and-run attacks. There were stories of Zigzith hives on frontier worlds being set ablaze, biological weapons tailored to decimate their populations, weapons the Alliance had never possessed, much less dared to consider. The Ferengi, for all their cunning negotiation tactics, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Trade deals with humans had a way of falling apart at critical junctures, disrupting supply lines and ruthlessly undercutting profit margins. They even seemed to begrudgingly admit that humans fought using a different economic calculus, where victory mattered more than the bottom line. But the stories of human resilience truly sent shivers down Valax's spine. Captured soldiers who defied all attempts at interrogation, even under torture protocols strictly outlawed by the Alliance. Entire planets were bombed to rubble, yet still churning out makeshift weapons and spawning new resistance groups. It was as if the humans drew some perverse strength from the chaos itself. "I have a theory, sir," his subordinate ventured, its voice hesitant. It was Extal, a younger member of his staff, and its scales were still vibrant in their youth. "Perhaps they are not so different from our own ancestors." Valax paused, intrigued. "Explain." "Their aggression, their unpredictability, these are not new in galactic history. Our own species once..." Extal paused, sensing its superior's disapproval. Yes, we all tamed those primeval instincts centuries ago, Verlax interjected. That's what separates us from savages. But as he spoke, he couldn't help but recall the ancient chronicles of the pre-Alliance era, the blood feuds, the territorial conquests, a time when his own people had also thrived on brutal pragmatism. What if, he thought with a jolt, the humans were simply at a different stage in that same journey? What if they were the reflection of a past the Alliance had desperately tried to bury? Verlax dismissed Extal with a gesture, requesting a full report on pre-Alliance human history. Left alone, he fell into a troubled reverie. The war was at a stalemate, if it could even be called that anymore. In their reckless abandon, it was as if the humans had thrown the delicate balance of power into complete disarray. Perhaps, Verlax thought with rising unease, it was time for the Alliance to change its approach. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, backroom negotiations, and the cautious exploration of radical ideas. Verlax found unlikely allies in figures as diverse as a cautious Zixith general and a maverick Ferengi trade mogul, both secretly horrified and begrudgingly respectful of the sheer brutality human tactics had exposed. Under Verlax's careful orchestration and the promise of an obscene amount of credits, a human delegation of mercenaries who held no allegiance to either side arranged a meeting. It was not the grand affair of their previous initial contact with humans, but a clandestine gathering on a neutral moon. The mercenary group's leader arrived without pomp or ceremony, accompanied only by a small security detail. The human commander they met was a giant, bearing scars that spoke of a life spent on battlefields. His eyes, however, held a strange mix of weariness and unwavering determination. It was the gaze of a man who had seen too much and would stop at nothing to protect what remained. "Let's cut to the chase," the human said bluntly, wasting no time with pleasantries. "You want a new rule book, one to counter ours. Isn't that right?" The words hung heavy in the makeshift conference room. Verlax's gaze flicked towards his allies, finding a mix of apprehension and desperate hope reflected back at him. "If adaptation is the key to survival," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, "then the Alliance must adapt." The negotiations lasted for days. Human tactics were analyzed, and their strengths and weaknesses were dissected. Old Alliance doctrines were mercilessly challenged and revised. It was a painful, often contentious process. Yet there was a begrudging sense of progress, a sliver of hope for a different kind of future. When they emerged, it was with a new set of protocols, an unsettling compromise born out of necessity in the face of an unstoppable force. The Galactic Alliance, Verlax realized, would never be the same. But within those changes, there was the flicker of a possibility, a chance the bloodshed might one day lessen. Because, after all, wasn't that what humans craved too? A fight where the stakes were survival and the cost was bearable. News of the revised war protocols spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the Alliance. Some howled outrage, seeing it as a capitulation, a betrayal of the very principles upon which the Alliance had been built. Others, however, whispered of a potential turning point, the first tentative step towards a more lasting peace. Verlax himself was under no illusions. The war with the humans was far from over. But he allowed himself a flicker of hope as he watched reports trickle in. The pace of human victories slowed, their relentless forward push blunted by a foe now adapting to their tactics. It was a brutal equilibrium, to be sure, a new kind of conflict forged in the crucible of necessity. In the quieter moments after a long day of strategic planning, Verlax found himself by the window, overlooking the vastness of space. He pondered Extal's words about their shared ancestry. The humans, it seemed, were intent on clawing their way to an era of peace, dragging the rest of the galaxy, kicking and screaming along with them. "Savages," he muttered, and grudging respect was laced within the ancient word. Perhaps the humans were destructive, chaotic, and unnervingly unpredictable. But perhaps, just perhaps, the jolt of that chaos was precisely what the complacent Alliance had needed. As the stars twinkled in the endless black above, Verlax held his breath, waiting for what this new chapter in galactic history would bring.